So good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's Power of Print free webinar in conjunction with our friends at Fundy. Good evening, Sanjay. How are you?
Hi, Jay. I'm very well. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. And we do have Ali in the wings. I'm not sure if she's going to say hi. Are you there, love?
I'm here. Hello.
Excellent. So we've got
Hi,
Ali
Ali.
also tonight with us from Fundy. So full house from our end anyway. Sanjay, great to have you online with us. I know you and I have tried to make this happen in the past, and I'm thrilled that you are joining me
In the end.
and we'll be making some more plans for the future as well. Sanjay, before we get
Absolutely.
going though, for those people who might not be aware of you, just a little bit about you and how you sort of journey into the world of the wedding photography that you're in now.
Wow. It's been quite a journey. I'm sure it has for a lot of people, but I got into it because I grew up with photography. My dad used to work for Kodak at the Kodak factory in Harrow, where he used to make the film. And so growing up, everything was about Kodak and all things photography. And they were really good in terms of looking after the families of their employees, and they'll provide events and workshops and things like that. So I grew up shooting film and actually developing film when I was a kid, self-taught in a way, until I started going to some of their classes, if you like, as a kid. But I also worked there as a student when I was at university. I used to work in the factory, making what they called tracks 3 and 4, which are the third and fourth layer of 7 layers of their Kodachrome, which was the nasty, toxic, light sensitive stuff. So yeah, I've just kind of gone with it. I'm actually a qualified architect, so I studied architecture at university. Went through that whole process of sort of doing 2 degrees and the qualification and all that sort of stuff. Qualified, practiced for a while, but the photography was just always there. In fact, it was there all the way through my my architectural education, because we used to have to build big models of our buildings, and I used to take pictures in the sunlight to model the building against the sky using sunlight. And everyone used to do, and we've got to remember, this is from the analog days. This is before Photoshop really took off, and makes me sound really old, but I'm not that old. And a lot of the other students asked if I could shoot their models as well. So sort of the business ideas came from way back then. But that's kind of been my journey. My wife and I, Roshni, started Jogia about 10 years ago, and it's just grown ever since. So just for those of you guys who are thinking of getting into photography and not entirely sure what you should do about your full-time jobs if you're still working, little bit of encouragement for you guys. Rosh and I, we started this whilst we're working full-time, and it just grew so quickly that we couldn't sustain that. We were working 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and the photography was demanding more and more time. So just so we didn't burn ourselves out, and obviously we wanted to make sure that we delivered a good product all the way through for our clients, we went 4-day weeks in our sort of Monday to Friday job. And within 6 months, went 3-day weeks, just because the more time we gave the photography business, the more time it demanded from us. And before you know it, we quit our jobs completely, and we've been running the photography business full time. And it's just grown bigger and better. Fantastic weddings sort of come our way, which we are very blessed. Lots of beautiful destination weddings. We get to meet some amazing people. At the end of last year, we opened our showroom up on Harrow Hill, which is a dedicated place for us. We've got our editing suite there. We've got sort of dedicated meeting rooms and that sort of thing. So it's not really a place to shoot, but it's kind of a nice luxury place for people to come and have meetings and see what we're about. And I think really sort of helps represent our brand. And I want to talk about brand a little bit today as well. So actually, we're just going to jump into what we're going to be speaking about, because there's quite a lot to get through.
Absolutely brilliant. Well, fantastic insight. And you haven't mentioned, so I will. Obviously, it helps when you're a pretty tidy photographer, because there's some really, really awesome images that I've seen from you, mate. So obviously that's something that we're going to share with them tonight anyway. So Sanjay, I'm going to give you the screen. So it's coming over to you now. I'll let you know when we can see everything clearly. And just while we do that,
Okay.
guys, just as a reminder, please, any questions that you have for Sanjay or Ali to do with Fundy tonight, please just pop those through the question panel. I will ask them where appropriate, or obviously we've got plenty of time at the end. Sanjay, I can see the screen clearly, I can hear you clearly, so I'm going to go quiet, but please feel free to prompt me at any point if you want to ask me if there's any questions, or I know you've got a little bit of a cough today, so please, you just take your time and we'll get there. It's all yours, bud.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we're talking about album upsells, but really it's about the power of print. And this isn't just about creating images that you have a sentimental attachment to, anything like that. Of course it's about that, but it's more about the overall power of print, to not just to your clients and your brides and grooms and everyone it affects around them, but also for your business as well. So it's a process, and the process is really about creating unique identity, which goes toward building a strong brand. And it'll all begin to make sense as I go along. So today I'm going to discuss some of my images and how I've created them, and what my process is in terms of creating these images, and how that goes towards creating my own identity within the market. Within let's face it, it's an overcrowded marketplace. There's a lot of photographers out there, and it's really important to create your own visual identity. When people look at your images and think, yeah, this is Sanjay's work, or this is Jay's work, or so on, and rather than going online and brides and grooms having to painfully go through lots of websites where the work starts to look the same. And unfortunately, there's a lot of that going on at the moment. So I want to help people create their own identity and therefore their own brand. So we'll talk about how my images help to create my own identity and the Jogia brand, and then how we go from brand defining images to the album design and the upsells and therefore the profits and everything that kind of goes with it on the business side of things. But one thing to just bear in mind is that album upsells alone have little effect if you're just relying on salesmanship. You need a strong brand that someone can believe in and buy into. You need a strong product, which is yourself, what you're offering your clients, and the actual physical products afterwards as well. And more than that, you need conviction, which comes from developing a process for yourself that you can rely on in terms of winning clients, dealing with clients, creating your own images, how you go from those images to defining your brand, how you can regularly and reliably kind of rely on that that process to create images as and when you need to. And then it just progresses, and it becomes a common thread throughout the whole thing. So I want you guys to sort of bear this in mind. I think this is more of a general thing for you guys. Let's strive to be singular in our differences, but plural in our efforts. So what does that mean? Well, essentially it means be unique, form a recognizable identity, and conduct yourself in a way that will protect our industry. So the singular bit is about you guys creating something for yourselves so that you are recognizable, that you can be differentiated from everyone else. But everything you do should be to protect your business and to protect our industry. And that's more about unity, guys. It's more about all of us pulling together and doing what we can to build ourselves up. So I've touched on this. The power of print isn't just about having your clients fall in love with a photo, which is great. You want them to do that, but it's about the process of creating the images, the process of getting them believing in your brand and in yourself. It's about your vision, and it's about the rigor in which you apply this. The discipline it takes to create an amazing set of images. So a lot of people get into wedding photography just because they've got a nice camera and they feel that they can do it. And there's nothing wrong with that. But get some education, get some training, learn how your camera works mechanically, inside out. Understand how this thing works so that you can make it do what you need it to do. And it's not just your camera, it's your lighting, it's your computer and your software that you use, and have a process all the way through so it's easy. There are no sticking points. And I'm just going to touch on something here. Last year, at the SWPP, we, for the first time, set up the Fundy booth. And a lot of people hadn't heard about this. It's an amazing brand from the States. And we've been using it for years. And this is a piece of software that we use to design albums. Now, we've got to remember that photographers come from all sorts of different backgrounds. And see, I'm a designer. So for me to design, it's easy. But not all photographers are designers. So when we were meeting people at the show last year, and we asked them if they're wedding photographers or what they do, and they said yes. First question is, do you sell albums? And they said no, they just sell the digital files. And our hearts would sink, because it's a real shame, because everything used to be about print, and it's the one thing, you know, it can't be hacked, it's future proof, it's a print is a print, it's there forever. And you know, when you print something, it eternalizes that image. And there's lots of other values that you can add to printing as well. But when we asked why they didn't design albums, it's because they were scared to do it. They didn't know where to begin. They didn't know, you know, how to go about picking the images, how to do pricing. But more than that, they didn't know how to design. They didn't know where to begin designing, and they didn't know how to use a lot of the software that was out there. They didn't know which one was the best one to use, or if they are using different print labs. Each print lab has their own piece of software, so it's having to learn 3 or 4 different bits of software, whereas Fundy unifies all of this. They're a bunch of geniuses, they really are. They've created this bit of software that allows you to design an album for all the main brands. They've taken on board all of the different products, the sizes, the margins. You don't have to worry about any of that. In fact, if you decide an album for one brand and then you decide that you're actually going to print it somewhere else because the client wanted a different kind of album, you can just change it, and the whole design changes around that. And you have to make very small adjustments here and there just to make it fit. In fact, most of the time you don't even need to make adjustments. It really is very quick. So people were spending a week designing an album, sometimes longer, and they were using very convoluted methods to do that. So the software really helps to simplify everything: the start point, the design process, the development of the album, and depending on what your process is. And I'll touch on my process a little bit later on. But just to kind of round that up a little bit more, it's when you come to designing your album, you need to come at it 2 ways. Obviously, one is you need to be able to make some profit, but you want to create something that can be passed on for generations for the sake of the couple and their history. And it's, on a business side, it's a great marketing tool. So you really want to do that. But then how do you convince your clients to invest in an album or even buy more albums? So we'll come on to that. So what's the process that we were talking about? Well, I suppose you could break it down into your photographic style, which is your vision, your direction, your lighting, your storytelling, all that sort of thing. Your technical approach, which is being able to adapt to different conditions, during a shoot, because you might have different lighting conditions. You're moving from place to place, or you're having to work in difficult lighting or whatever it is. Understanding your equipment, as I've touched on earlier on, understanding lighting, the science of lighting. This is the thing that's missed by most photographers I've spoken to, is the color management, which you've got to do throughout, from capture to post-production to output, which is printing as well. All of these things feed back into obviously your images, which then form a set of images, and that set of images is what you use to inform your album, and that's what you're going to use to upsell. So if you've done all of this stuff right to begin with, it becomes much easier to sell bigger albums and more albums, and that helps with your brand, builds a stronger brand, and helps your bank balance as well, which is what everyone really wants, isn't it? Okay, so there's the visual impact that you create as well. So it's the intensity in which you do all of these things I've spoken about, particularly the photographic style as well. And it's your consistency, massively underrated, or massively underestimated, I would say. And this is a consistency in your approach and your images and your finishing, and it's in everything you do. The way you convey yourself, the way you speak to clients, the way people see you, your image, your, as a person as well as a brand. So all of these things help form the basis of your identity and your brand. So what's a photographic style? In short, it's a consistent way of seeing things. It comes from your personality. Who are you? You need to know something about yourself. What kind of person you are, your likes, your dislikes. Are you outgoing and confident, or expressive and flamboyant? Are you shy and introverted? Can you think of ideas on the spot? Are you a technical person? Can you develop a concept with ease? Are you a director or a doer, or both? The point is that it's a fluid process. You think about Vincent van Gogh, for the artists out there. His work became more disturbed and dark as his career progressed and his life progressed. For you music fans out there, jazz fans, Miles Davis, whose music became more offbeat and avant-garde. We were talking about the greats here as well. And architect Le Corbusier, his design language changed with every building he designed, for the sake of experimentation and for the journey. So it is about the journey. It's not the destination. I feel if you do reach a destination, that's kind of your time to stop. You have to keep evolving. You have to keep changing and keep adapting. And when I look back on my work over the years, I can see a common thread, but I can see the evolution as well. I can see how it's changed. I can see how it's become more refined, or how it sort of adapted to my personality, and how, with how I've matured over the years, and with all the things I've seen and experienced, and the things that sort of appeal to me. It sort of manifests in my work and in everything I do. So this is something that we all need to recognize and tap into. There's nothing wrong with it, because you are who you are. And I think this is the key to having a unique style and approach, because each person is unique. No two people are the same. And so long as you rely on your personality and you use that to inform your work and your style and everything you do, your work will always be unique. And that helps to create that identity that people will begin to recognize. And that in itself will sort of feed back into the brand. So I hope that's making sense. But you got to identify whether you're an in-camera artist or a digital artist, or are you a bit of both? What's your style? So here's an example of an image of a couple at a lovely place called Moore Park, which is not too far from me in Harrow. And this is an in-camera approach with sort of careful composition, careful lighting, careful posing. The lighting shaped to create this photograph. So this is lit with flash, believe it or not, from camera right. Now, as you can see, we're in this sort of double height gallery space, and I had to shoot with a very wide lens to create this image. Set up on a tripod. I tend not to shoot on tripods much, because I find it sort of really slows me down, but set this up on a tripod so I can get all the geometry straight and so on. And we had to try and avoid lots of awkward shadows and that sort of thing. So I had a Profoto flash, which was snooted. So anyone who doesn't know what a snoot is, it's basically a cone that funnels the light into one spot, knowing that by the time it's gone from one end of the room to the other, that cone of light is going to become a bigger spread, but it's quite soft still, and it sort of focused the light exactly where I need it to go. So on a very tall stand, the light almost touching the ceiling, and sort of directing these guys with careful posing. Obviously, I've taught them my direction, and this is what we create. So this is done in camera. It doesn't rely on post-production to create this sort of imagery. Obviously, in post-production, we enhance things. We clean up the colors, we get rid of any noise and center dust and all that sort of stuff that we need to do. Maybe open up some shadows and kind of open up the dynamic range that's available to us. I shoot RAW, and a lot of people shoot JPEG, and the reason I shoot RAW is so I can really make use of that latitude of the dynamic range and the information in that digital file. So we get something like that. But at the same time, I love cars, big petrol head, and this is something that I was asked to photograph by Lamborghini UK. for you petrol heads out there, it's Lamborghini Veneno, one of 4 ever made. This one's owned by Lamborghini, and it's the first time it's been photographed professionally on the streets of London. So, it's quite an honor. But the technique here is very different to the previous image, where this relies on a certain amount of digital work, sort of digital art, because when I'm photographing cars, particularly at night, I'm using a technique called light painting, where I'll walk around the car with a flash or a continuous light and paint over the car, over its lines to create those highlights. And the camera's static on a tripod over a long exposure. This relies on me having to go back and stitch the images together and brush in the information I need in Photoshop. So, I love photographing cars. I do this for fun, and I use that time to kind of experiment as well with techniques. But then I try and use all of these things to my advantage in all the other different fields. So I brought this technique back into my wedding work. I mean, this isn't so much a wedding, actually. It's, in a way, it's kind of a post-wedding shot. The lady in the car, good friend of mine, Roshni Jogia, she is also a wedding photographer and sort of a family and portrait photographer now in the States. And she asked me to do this photo shoot with her and her husband, because she didn't like her wedding photos from whatever 14 years ago by whoever had shot them. I mean, she just said, we don't have any cool photographs, and can we do something? So we developed this technique, this new style of shoot, where initially it began as a shoot that was going to be just like a post-wedding shoot where they would get some cool photographs, and then the concept developed and it became a little bit more than that, and it became what we call a lifetime shoot. So now the idea is we do one shoot with them every year for the rest of their lives, and each year's photos would form a volume. So basically, again, coming into the upsells, they would buy an album for each shoot for each year, which they can then show to their kids in the future, their grandkids in the future, and show them what they were like, what life was like, places they've been, the places they like to go to, and that sort of thing. So on this particular day, this was the first of the series. It was a kind of a fly on the wall type shoot. So I'd turn up at the house, said to them, look, just stay in your PJs, let me in, and then I'll just start documenting you guys as you're going along. So I shot them throughout the day, just doing their day-to-day stuff, going to the shops, going to the butchers, whatever it is, getting ready to go out in the evening, that sort of thing. So as the day progressed, it went from more photojournalistic to stylized. And this was the last shot of the day. But this is combining my sort of my wedding couple portrait style photography with the car stuff that I do. So again, this is light painting. This image was put together in Photoshop as a composite. So you got to experiment and pull these things together. So how do you develop a style? Well, it helps to know your craft, which is understanding how light works, for sure, because everything we do is all about light. Understand the science, understand how you can shape it, understand how you can use it to create mood and emotion. You've got to understand the psychology of framing and composition, how we read images. For those who read English, you read an image in the same way that you read English, from left to right, top to bottom. And when we're composing photographs, we have to try and lead the eye where we want it to go to have maximum impact on that, on the emotion and the narrative. So, it really helps to master all the technical aspects for greater control, not just in the image making, but the effect of the image afterwards as well. So post-production is important too, but don't be a slave to it. So things like this image here, and even this image here, required post-production, but it's not the thing that drove the image. The concept behind it drove the image, and the technique of capturing and the technique of post-production is what sort of helped to pull all of that together and tie it up. So here's an example of, I guess, psychology in the framing. This image is called contrasts, because it's exactly what it's about. This image wasn't planned. This is a pre-wedding shoot that we did for a wedding couple, and this happened in a car park, believe it or not. So we were going to shoot in Hoxton at a I think it was a bar that we'd sort of reserved an area in, and we parked the cars and we saw this guy with the spray cans doing some graffiti and thought actually it looked quite cool. So what I did was switch on my car headlights to light him up and give him this sort of very sinister presence, you know, with the sort of the shadow that's bigger than him, and the very cold, hard, stark light. And I set the couple up on the right of the image in a warm, soft pose using warm, soft light. So as you read across the image becomes sort of softer, but then you've got this play on contrast of light, of the posing, of the kind of the softness on the right and the hardness on the left of the hooded guy. And we did this without him knowing, actually, because I didn't want to ruin the narrative. I didn't want to sort of affect it that way. He did sort of stop afterwards and ask me if he should get out of the way, and I just said to him, no, carry on, it's cool. And showed him the picture afterwards. He absolutely loved it. But it's really playing with all of these sort of things. So all of these different approaches start to stitch together to create a visual style that becomes recognizable. And the more you kind of look through my images afterwards, you'll sort of understand what I'm talking about, and how even though every couple is different, every wedding is different, every situation is different, there's still a continuous thread all the way through it. So this is important. This is an important part of developing a style. It's knowing your equipment. Make it work for you and not the other way around. Don't become a slave to your equipment either. Know what equipment is relevant and when to use it. Things like lens choice, the type of lighting, the types of modifiers, gels, that sort of thing, and try and develop a rhythm with your equipment, and understand how it behaves, so you don't end up in a fluster when something doesn't work properly or something's broken down. You know what you can jump to next to sort of make up for it. And I'll touch on that with another one of my images later on. But an example is my cameras. I use Canon 1DX Mark IIs, very customizable cameras, and no one else will be able to use my cameras just because of the way I've configured the buttons and so on. But things like I don't know if any of you guys know it, but there's two buttons on the front of the camera which are programmable, and I've set one of them up to be able to switch to servo mode just so as long as I hold it down. So that's servo focusing. So long as I hold the button down, and it just goes back to one shot the moment I take my finger off it. So I don't need to menu dive. I can do all this stuff while I've got the camera against my face. And it just means that I can be adaptable in changeable situations or when things are moving quickly around me. An image like this, for example, this is a Sikh wedding that we shot in Miami. Things don't happen particularly quickly in Sikh weddings, but you can't predict what the guests are going to do and what's going to happen in the background. So I'm sort of focused on the bride between two posts that are in front of it. So there's two posts and the canopy where the priest sits. And here they're sort of in this shiny red material. So I'm shooting through the gap between these two posts, focused on the bride, and she's just looked up at this point, and I've got a reflection of her mum, just sort of wiping away a tear or something like that. But it meant knowing how my camera behaves and using my custom functions and that sort of thing, I'm able to get that shot and get that moment without having to take dozens of photographs and sort of burst through a moment. And whilst there's nothing wrong with that, there's a time and place to do it. But sometimes ceremonies are very quiet and sort of very very soft places to be in. The last thing you want is sort of shutters in the background going off and disturbing the flow of what's going on. Here's another example. It's a pre-wedding shoot we did in Dubai, and the bride loves Dubai, so we went over there and we did the shoot over there. We thought we'd go into the desert and take photographs of them on camels, which sounds very romantic and lovely and wonderful, but shooting in the desert is a really difficult thing to do. So if any of you guys have ever been jogging on the beach, you know how difficult it is to move on sand. So imagine doing that in the desert dunes when the wind is blowing the sand into your face. But the whole thing looks very sort of calm and peaceful and serene and very romantic. This is the reality of it. The camels were moving a lot quicker than we'd hoped, and they were coming to this ridge line on this dune. So I had to run over, and I'm sort of yelling at my assistants, going, "Bring me a flash on the stand," and he's kind of scrambling up the dunes, and eventually I'm sort of when I took the shot, I was actually on my knees to get lower down, and I couldn't keep my eyes open just because I had sand going across my, but I knew that my equipment would be able to handle it. I knew the settings I needed to use. I was able to make the equipment work for me. And yeah, whilst there's a bit of sand still sort of grinding in the focus rings of the lenses, it doesn't really affect the images. And I know, everything works perfectly. So knowing your equipment means that you know how far you can push its limits. So these are the other things that you need to use to develop a style. Everyone needs inspiration and precedence. I think a lot of people use their competitors' websites and stuff they see on social media for inspiration, and I would discourage that, because that's probably one of the root causes of a lot of the similarities we're seeing in the industry at the moment. So use other things. Obviously, use your personality, but look at magazines, watch movies, books on fashion. There's a lot of inspiration in terms of posing and lighting and styling and composition and that sort of thing there. Music videos are fantastic because they're aspirational, and it's the imagery of a movie condensed into 4 minutes. So they're loaded. If you get a music video, and particularly a lot of modern sort of more stylistic stuff, you can sort of press play and pause and go through this whole thing, and you'll start to see some incredible imagery going on there, which you might not have noticed originally. Even things like the perfume adverts that we saw a lot of during Christmas, they're amazing for this sort of thing. So don't dismiss them. If you've got them recorded on your Sky Plus, and go back and watch them, and get your phone out and take screen grabs of what looks like a good image, and then dissect it, understand it, critique the image, look at the lighting, the posing, the composition, the colors, the expressions, and look at all the things that make the image work, but also look at all the things that let the image down, because there's nothing like understanding flaws in an image that will stop you from making those mistakes yourself. So you've really got to start to pull all this stuff together, and don't look at your competitors' work, because you start to form preconceptions of what what you're expected to do or what you should be doing, and you start to place unreasonable pressure on yourself. So don't do it to yourself, guys. So these are the things to look at. How was it posed? How was it lit? Was it staged or directed? How was it composed? How was it processed and finished? This is an important thing as well, because obviously post-production is a big thing. What works in the image, what doesn't, and then go and create your own work. Don't just create the stuff that you've seen in magazines or whatever, but go back and look at your own work and see what works in your images and where you can improve. It's one of the single biggest forms of development that you can have, is having your images critiqued, and ask other people to critique your work. There's lots of big pros in the industry. I actually do a critique session myself for my one-to-one students as well, so that's something we can talk about at the end. But the critique is the single biggest form of development that any photographer can actually undergo. So we've got to learn to pull back for a minute and realize that photography isn't just about creating competition winning images for your clients or for yourself, but it's about reaching out to people. It's about satisfying your own urges as an artist, of course, but it's about creating memories that people will cherish and value. But it's also about life. It's about yours, the people around you, your clients, their friends, their family. It's about everyone your images affect, basically. It's a lot to remember. But here's a little trick. Stop remembering and start feeling. Because if you open your feelings up at weddings, you start to feel the emotion of what's going on, and it really shows in your photographs. One of the things that I have bride and groom saying to me all the time when they come over for a consultation, I show them slideshows, that sort of thing, is that they felt like they were there, and that's one of the biggest compliments that I think a photographer can have, because these are complete strangers. They weren't at the event, but they felt like they were there because they're feeling the emotion of what I've captured, and they're feeling that because I felt it when I was capturing it. And And yeah, at times it can be tear jerking at weddings, but that's a great thing. There's this part of the ceremony that we're looking at here, where the family is saying bye to the bride. She's about to leave home. It gets very emotional. My wife Roshni is always in tears behind the camera, and I'm there sort of fighting it back myself. But I think it's really it's important to feel it and not just shoot what you see, but shoot what you feel. So use that raw emotion. And things like this. These guys would have rehearsed the wedding. They would have planned with their family what's going to happen. The bride would have been wanted to sort of be carried in on this what is called a dolly. And what they didn't plan for was that the archway is going to be too low, but it made for a funny moment. And the bride loves this image. This is one of her favorite images, one of my favorite images from that wedding as well. So, humor is still in motion. Capture the humor. It's not just all about people crying. And remember to experiment. So experiment with posing, lighting, and that sort of thing. I mean, here, again, it looks very calm and serene, but when I photographed this, I was on another boat in Miami. And as you can see, the sun is behind. So where's all the light coming from? Well, I had a light on the couple, below them. You can't tell in the picture just because of the way it's been posed, but they're sort of leaning into the light, so it looks less ghoulish. But also, I had my assistant on the boat that I was on, holding, again, another pro photo, out on a boom over the water to get some of this highlight on the front of the boat. So that's where that light's coming from. And it was really choppy. It was windy. When this main yacht was moving around, it would create a wake, which would then throw the boat I was on, which was much smaller, around. So we were constantly going left to right, sort of rocking around, and it was really impossible to try and control this whole thing. But it's a great test of, your ability in terms of being able to photograph and predict, what's going to happen in the image because of all the movement and the light and so on. But also knowing that your equipment can handle it as well. Experimenting again. This was a car shoot for actually the brother of that Miami bride. This was his car collection, and he asked me to come back later that year and photograph his 40th birthday. And so we did a shoot with him and his cars, but I just wanted to show one of the cars because I love cars. But this is, again, using those techniques I was talking about, not just on one car, but on 5 cars in one place. This is his underground car park, and it was really hot, all the services are there in underground, so we were sweltering, but we were able to create something that looks and feels so controlled and just calm, but has amazing visual impact. So my approach, and the approach that I would recommend everyone follows, is slow down, learn to feel, create your art in camera, enrich the image with post-production. Don't use the post-production to make the image necessarily. Try and feel what they feel and try and see what they feel, if that makes sense. So, put yourself in the shoes of a loved one and how they would feel in that situation. So, someone that someone to be close to. It really helps to kind of see and feel what other people do. So we touched on consistency earlier on, and this is kind of going more into what needs to happen in your albums. Consistency is so important because it's consistency in your approach in making images, so you can be consistent in your image making throughout your images. So you want to be consistent in the mood, the emotion, the narrative, the look and feel of the image, telling a story, telling a macro story and a micro story. And consistency within a single wedding is key for strong album design and upsells, absolutely. So all of these images are from the same wedding, and they have a very similar look and feel to them. I think I went through those a little bit too quickly, so let's just do it a bit slower. So try and pre-visualize if you can. Pre-visualize a story or narrative. some people like to go and visit the site before, some people don't. It depends on how well you know it, or if there's just come a lot of logistical challenges, get around them, get over them, so you can focus on the creativity. Try and pre-visualize some of the ideas that lead to an image. Get over the potential hurdles, as I said, of logistics, lighting, timing. That previous wedding, the images from the previous wedding I was showing you about, showing you were from a wedding I shot in Lake Como. And we had to get everywhere by boat, so logistics were difficult, and going up and down steep hills with equipment and that sort of thing, and tackling the heat, and people coming from different places and that sort of thing. So it helped to kind of go there the day before and understand what's going to happen, but also walking yourself through the day and understanding what the logistical nightmares will be, so that you can plan for certain things. Where the opportunities will be for yourself to be able to create the images that we're talking about, throughout the day, but not just the hero images, but all the images that tell the story. Here's an example. For this couple, we went to Iceland, and this was actually created in camera, not using Photoshop or anything, and it wasn't meant to happen. We wanted it to. So basically, he proposed to her in Iceland the year before, and they went outside of the season. So the aurora happens between October and March or something like that. And so when they went outside of October. They didn't get to see it. So they said, can we have the pre-wedding shoot in Iceland? And hopefully we get to see the aurora. I'm like, great, I'd love to. And in fact, one of the things I've always wanted to do was do a portrait under the Northern Lights. Anyway, it just so happens that when we could all go, it was outside of the season again. It was in April. And when we got there, the hotel owner said, look, there's been no activity for a month. Any activity we had was only a 2 out of 9. There's a scale from 0 to 9 for the activity of the Northern Lights. And on the first day, we got stuck in a snowstorm. Not so much stuck, but we lost a lot of time being sort of in a blizzard. And we got some cool shots in the blizzard, by the way, because when you have these opportunities, you just grab them. So we got outside and we shot in the blizzard. It was so windy. I was being blown across the road by the wind. I was actually sliding on the ice. Anyway, we didn't make it to the locations that we wanted to get the shots at some of the waterfalls and that sort of thing. We came back to our hotel, and all feeling a little bit dejected. We were getting out of the van and unloading the equipment, and I see a little bit of this sort of green wisp in the sky, and I'm sort of calling to my team, sort of action stations, let's do this. Now, up until that day, for a couple of previous days where we'd been doing recce's, I'd been drilling into these guys what we need to do if we see the aurora, because we don't know how long it's going to last, how intense it's going to be, and there's a certain range within sort of technical settings that we have to work within to be able to capture the aurora in a very sort of clean, crisp way. And we set it up, and I tested the lighting on my wife, and we set the whole thing up very quickly. Took a couple of shots and it looked cool. Called a couple out, took a shot and it looked fine. And just as I was about to call it, it just started raining green, and we got a 7 out of 9. And we got a whole lot of beautiful shots like this, sort of dream situation for us. So that kind of pre-planning and that preparation allowed us to get this kind of image. Otherwise, we would have been maybe faffing around with our equipment, trying to get the right settings, get the right balance of light and all this sort of stuff. So we'd lit these guys with flash, by the way, because it had to be a long exposure. And obviously you can freeze a couple with flash. And as soon as the picture's taken, well, as soon as the flash burst has gone off, the couple can actually walk off the scene, because it's such a long exposure that you don't see them move. And then we can just, for the rest of the exposure, capture the Northern Lights. That was quite good fun. So overall, style is the accumulation of specific bits of personality expressed through visual language. So working through trial and error, experimentation and experience, I discovered this. And think about this for a minute, because you can apply this to anything you do: the way you dress, the way you talk, the music you listen to, the way you shoot. And this for me was my validation, this realization of this sentence, not the validation of peers or of a crowd. It's knowing that I can rely on this every single time, because you can create something that moves you. Other people might not get the image, but they don't need to. It doesn't matter. You've done this for yourself. that's the freedom you have as an artist. So lose the shackles of expectation and convention, guys, and free up a little bit. So for me, I like to juxtapose things, light, shadow, the subject, or objects in the frame. You know, the frame in space, the composition of the different elements, and I create a visual vocabulary for myself that I can use over and over again to create my identity. You know, it's innate. It's like how an artist holds the brush, and you know, it's their signature strokes. That's how it is. So this is how I hold the brush. I love being playful with light and dark, negative space, contrast within the image, and with delicate detail. You know, again, we've got contrast, we've got negative space. I fell in love with her eyes on this photograph, actually. And this was in a waiting room. The bride, this is again a Sikh wedding, and the bride has to wait in a waiting room before she comes down into the wedding after everyone else has arrived. The groom's already arrived, and she's got to come down after this. But she was in this waiting room that was just like a little box. It was not very nice space, and there wasn't nice furniture, there wasn't nice lighting, and it was really simple. You know, go in there, close the lights, close the door, close the blinds on the windows, create the pose, adjust the light, the daylight coming through the blinds to pick up the highlights on her eyes, and it was just literally me, her window light, and a 7200 on my camera. And we got this. And she absolutely, you know, she nearly started crying when she saw the image. She couldn't believe how beautiful she looked. And she didn't know what we were going to get in that room because it was such a difficult place to be in. Here's another example. I like to use reflections. I'm sure a lot of you do. But for me, it's not whimsical or arbitrary, you know, a whimsical or arbitrary use of reflections just because it looks cool. But for me, reflections are affirming. The abstraction on the surface moves with me. It sees what I see. And so the image becomes about me and what I'm seeing and what I'm feeling. It becomes about my style and my approach. So that's why I tend to use reflections and then use them in a particular way. Now, some of you might be looking at this thinking, hold on, why are those two reflections the same? Why are they not the opposite way around? The reason is that the bride and groom are actually behind me, and both of these are, you know, they're a reflection. So the one on the left was the direct reflection. Obviously, I lit them with a bright light to overpower everything. You know, I can bring everything else down and sort of bring them up in the picture, and it overpowers the reflection of me, so you don't see me in the picture. The one on the right is a reflection in the door. So I've got my assistant to hold the door open slightly to pick that double reflection up. That's what we get there. So just bear with me a second, guys. I'm just going to mute myself. Right, I'm back. Sorry, as Jay said, I've got this terrible cough that's been going around that everyone else seems to have. So here we are. You know, this is consistency. We're using reflections again, the look, the feel, the toning. It's a different couple, but it's a similar look and feel. And so we have that kind of consistency in approach that, you know, helps to sort of affirm my own unique style. So, you know, don't be afraid to let crazy ideas manifest. You know, this is all going somewhere, and it is going to the albums, and I'll come to that very shortly, guys. Because the day before something was a breakthrough, it was a crazy idea. So don't be afraid to use crazy ideas on a shoot. Now, I'm going to show you an image in just a second. This is, again, in Iceland, same couple. We found this wrecked aeroplane. It's a shoot we did a few years ago now. It's become quite a popular spot over the last few years. Iceland, if you've not been there, is a crazy place. Extreme weather, really extreme weather. So we had to find this airplane using GPS coordinates, and it was a 5-kilometer drive off road. So we got there, and it was hailing. It was hailing sideways. It was really windy and really cold. So the couple would wait in the van, would keep them warm until we'd set all the lights up and done everything, and we'd pull them out and do the shot. So we got there, we'd done all the exposures, we'd done the basic exposure, set the camera up on a tripod. I was using a sort of a remote control so that I could control the camera on an iPad, so that I could hold onto light stands because it was so windy. You know, we had to use boulders to hold all the light stands down. Now this picture was created with 18 lights. Okay, 18 lights, including the van headlights, because we needed to light the aeroplane as well as light the couple. Now, we'd set everything up and it was all looking good, and then it started hailing even more, and we couldn't get the couple out to shoot in that hail because it was actually painful. So we ended up waiting in the car for an hour, in the van for an hour, until it sort of died down. So when it died down, we'd lost a lot of daylight. So now the whole exposure balance is completely wrong because we'd exposed for very low ambient light, and we had all this sort of mixture of flash and continuous light all over the aeroplane and all over the scene and that sort of thing. And we had to change it. So anyway, we did the shot, but when we came back to it, the quickest way to reset everything wasn't to change the lights, but was to put a graduated filter on the lens upside down. So now I'm re-exposing for whatever light we have in the sky, and I'm bringing down the effect of the flash using a graduated filter, and we basically get this. So, you know, again, a little bit of pre-planning because we've been to the site before, but it wasn't raining or hailing or anything like that at that time. And you know, you can see how much light we had to use on the aeroplane, even inside the aeroplane, in that sort of what's left of the nose cone or the cockpit, and a whole lot of lighting on the couple. So again, this isn't photoshopped. You know, I didn't Photoshop them in. This was created like this in camera. So crazy ideas, guys. You know, don't be afraid to use it. You know, it could define you and your style. So this is an important part of image making, as far as I'm concerned. You know, we've all heard about the exposure triangle. This is what I call the image triangle. And an image is made up of these three things: the emotion, the concept, and the technical aspects. Okay, and you know, it's up to you to decide where that circle in the middle goes, you know, what the bias is on the image. But you need all three of these images, and they need to support each other to get a strong image, basically. And it's every image you create. It's all your photojournalistic ones, it's your posed ones, it's everything in between. Because if you're controlling these things throughout, you're going to end up with more consistent images throughout for you to be able to create a stunning album that is irresistible. And that's what we're talking about here, basically. So here's an example of an image I think has a bit of everything. There's, you know, you can see that tension between the couple there, and there's some real emotion. So there's the emotional side of it. The concept, it's the styling, you know, it's what they're wearing. It's kind of got a 1930s sort of feel to it with the you know, the clothes they're wearing and the you know, the venue and that sort of thing. And technically, you know, lighting I think is pretty good there. The posing's pretty good. Could have done with a little bit of refinement here and there, but that's just me sort of critiquing my own images. And you've always got to do this to try and find areas of improvement. But you know, this for me makes a really solid photograph that the couple absolutely love. So the concept is an important thing and probably the least practiced by most photographers. And it's something I struggled with early on because, you know, I felt early on that I could just go into any situation and pull a rabbit out of the hat. And sometimes, you know, you have writer's block. We all have that. But if you can use anything as a concept, stuff that's happening in front of you might be something that you've thought about before. So spontaneity is cool. You know, I like structure and order and pattern and symmetry, but sometimes I break that. You know, that can be a concept. It's having a plan really helps. So if you can pre-visualize, that will really help. And even if you don't use it, that's fine. But you've gone there with something up your sleeve, which I think is an important thing to do. So have a plan, don't be rigid about it, remain fluid, okay? Here's an example of remaining fluid. This was a pre-wedding shoot we did in London, and this wasn't meant to happen. We just happened to stop in this location. He'd got his nice car, his nice Aston Martin, all polished up for me. But we didn't really know where we were going to do that shoot. And we were going from where we had met to the place that we were going to do the shoot. And this is in Hyde Park. And this was a few years ago now where I suppose it hasn't really settled down, but the police are very paranoid about cameras and lenses in London. So we had to be really quick because there's a lot of police around at this time. And we saw this spot, and I don't know if any of you guys know London or Hyde Park, but this is when you're driving along, you reach the Serpentine, and the road sort of bends around to the right toward the Serpentine Gallery, and there's a car park on your left. It's basically at the end of the car park on the road. So we got there, we set this thing up within like 5 minutes and took the shot and then moved on, and this is what we ended up with basically. Again, combining things. combining different styles, my love of cars, my love of shooting, photographing people and lighting and all that sort of stuff, and architecture all in one. Story here is better pre-planning. This is Canary Wharf, which is notoriously difficult to be able to photograph in. And this is the day of the wedding, between the wedding and the reception. The groom says, I love your car shot, Sanj, and I need one of those at the wedding. So can you make sure that you get one of these things? Now, the day was running late for various reasons. So the timing between the wedding and reception was actually just starting to really fade. And I needed to get the shot. So I called up security and I said, look, I've got to do this photograph. I don't have very long, but there's people everywhere. And he really wants a shot with his car. And it's his wedding day and he spent a fortune on the venue and all that kind of stuff. And the guy said, look, you've asked nicely and I understand where you're coming from. I'm going to close this road off for you for half an hour. So he closed the road off for us in Canary Wharf, where I was able to set up all the lights on the car for the couple and basically create these images for them. So what could be an example, of a concept? It's what you shoot with, how you use it. I look at my environment and I see what I'm working with. Here's an example of a wedding in Santorini, and for me, the concept here is sort of theatre. So you've got the couple in the canopy who are the actors. You've got the stage set, which is the scenery behind them. They've chosen Santorini for its scenery because it's beautiful, and the audience are the guests. I put lights inside of the canopy because we're shooting into the sun, and as you know, if I expose for the background, then we get a silhouette. If I expose for the couple, then I get blown out background, but that's not good enough. So, I want to create that balance. I want to capture all these things in the image. So the lighting inside helps me control that. I've used the graduated filter to bring down the sky a little bit more, and we end up with an image that's beautifully balanced. The idea of a concept here is, this image is actually called The Poser. So this bride, Namisha, really lovely girl, very outgoing, very bubbly. I happened to catch her just checking out her reflection in the car window, just sort of adjusting herself, making sure she looks good for the shoot that we're about to do. And I only caught that while I was sort of offloading my equipment from the boot of my car while I was setting up. And I kind of chuckled to myself, thinking, "Oh, that's typically Namisha." And then a light bulb went off, and I thought, "Hold on, that's my concept." So rather than getting a shot of her looking at her reflection in the window, I turned it around and got her looking in the wing mirror, and obviously set the pose up and set the clothes up. I had to light the car first before I could light her, and we end up with an image like this. So sometimes it's on the fly, and you just got to be observant to see what's going on. So I'll talk through some of these very quickly because I know we're very short on time. In fact, we've gone over slightly, but beautiful venue. This was on a wedding day, and this colonnade actually has no lights in it whatsoever. So all these lights are mine. So the concept here is the symmetry, the architecture, and the lighting. I've exposed the sky. I've used the filter to bring some detail out in that, and I've used here. I've used 7 flashes, basically 1 pro photo on the couple, and 3 speed lights either side behind every other column to light that whole that space up, and that's how we end up with that image there. This is an example I mentioned earlier on about equipment sort of going wrong. It's not quite going wrong, but this is in the Shard in London at the public viewing gallery. So you're not allowed to take a whole lot of equipment up there. And I'd happened to forget my modifiers for my speed lights in the car. And if any of you've been here, it's like going through airport security. You have to sort of go through scanners and all sorts of stuff. And there wasn't time to go back down and get the modifiers that I needed. So here I've exposed for the landscape, the sort of the built area. I put a graduated filter on the sky to bring that down to try and balance the two. I've got a polarizing filter on top of that as well to cut out the reflections in the glass on the right so we can see the couple. And then I've got a modified speed light, check this out, shot backwards through a lens. Okay, that's my modifier. Expensive modifier, but it worked brilliantly. So kind of thinking on the fly, guerrilla style lighting, and what it meant was I could funnel that light into the area I wanted rather than lighting the whole of the inside of the Shard up, which would have competed with all the stuff on the left. So again, we end up with an image that's very well balanced and a part of creating a style. Here, the concept is, the geometries, the lines, the color palette. Obviously it's a strong color palette here, and we end up with that. But the lighting, lighting is a key thing for me, and that becomes part of my my signature, if you like. The way I shape light, the way I use light to create emphasis on certain things and make it believable. Again, color palette. This is Rome. We were shooting this at sort of 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, so that we weren't disturbed by tourists. And any of you have been to Rome, know it's a crazy place. It's very, very busy, and especially in front of St. Peter's over here. So this is the only way we're going to get empty streets, is by going at 4 in the morning and shooting this thing. But the color palette with what they're wearing against the background, again, using careful lighting to be able to help with the emphasis. So the balance. What is the balance? It's balancing the emotional response with your technical abilities and a solid concept every single time. And that'll be the making of your style that you can call upon regularly and consistently. And it's that style that will begin to inform your brand identity. Okay, so now let's quickly just look through an album. So you've seen some images from this bride and groom already today. And I've used Fundy software to design this. I generally like to design my albums like this, where I start by introducing the bride and the groom separately. Usually the bride first. So even the way I name my projects on my servers is always bride's name first and then the groom's name, and so we kind of repeat that pattern throughout. So introducing the bride and the groom. Nice clean design. I try not to clutter the album with too many images on a spread, so that images aren't competing with each other, but there's a natural flow. Remember we were saying, if you read English, you're going left to right, top to bottom. There's a natural flow, and it's easy on the eyes. Notice the consistency in the images, the colors, the processing. We're trying to do everything we can to make it easy to read an album, to make it attractive, so that your focus goes on what the images are saying, what's going on in the images, and not distracted by something being too dark or too bright, or the wrong tone, or the white balance is off one way or the other. There's no dynamic range or whatever it is. So something, the previous images are all about the bride getting ready, and a spread will tell a story when I design an album. So we don't have bits of another part of the day bleeding into a spread, because that becomes a distraction and you lose that continuity, you lose that consistency. So this is scene setting. This is establishing, the venue, and reflection shows the inside on the outside. Perhaps it depends on how you read images. And on the right hand side, you've actually got the inside. The preparation, the groom arriving, seeing things differently, looking at reflections, as I was talking about earlier on. The PJ images, photojournalistic images, getting a lot closer this time, which is different to the post stuff. So for me, I'm always trying to create a balance between strong PJ images and strong posed images, so the couples are always getting the best of both worlds. You've got the images there of the Rolls Royce sort of emblem, the Spirits of Ecstasy, and then focus shifts on what's going behind it. So it's being playful. It's trying to tell a story of how the thing progresses. The groom being led into the building by the bride's family, and then there's a ceremony that sort of happens, and the focus is on the groom. And so there's a natural flow from left to right, and it becomes easy to read, and we're storytelling. In this situation, there's 3 of us in my team, and the wedding happens in that canopy that's at the top of the page, the right-hand page. So I tend to shoot from the back of that canopy, quite low down, and I hide behind people, so I can't be seen as much as possible. And that way I can create that image on the left as it's happening. I won't walk backwards down the aisle, because if I did, I wouldn't get that image on the right, which was my assistant, who was, knows how I work, knows what my vision is like, and knows that I love symmetry, knows that I don't really like sort of tilt in my pictures and that sort of thing. But then at the same time, Roshni's shooting within the guest to get the guest side view, which is that image on the right on this spread. And the image on the left is obviously a progression from the previous one. So you've got this natural flow, and it's storytelling, and it's showing different points of views. Now, just a little explanation without getting too much into it. In the Hindu wedding, the groom sits behind a curtain. He can't see his bride. And, some people will say that the reason is that the groom's not meant to have seen his bride before they got married, but I'm sure that's just sort of a joke. And maybe traditionally that's how it used to be. But anyway, kind of using those wavy lines on the sheet to lead in between, into his eyes, that kind of signifies something. So always looking for different things that help to tell the story. The different angles on the right-hand page that show what happens when the sheet comes down, their expressions and that sort of thing. Again, the flow, look at the consistency of the colors, the imagery, the lighting, the impact that the images have. Shooting through things, that framing. So the two images on the left-hand side were shooting through the garlands that they put on each other at the start. And then again, later on, I mean, she's just a stunning, stunning bride. So using the wood carvings of the canopy to shoot through to frame out distractions. And we create what's basically a moment-driven portrait. It's a portrait of the bride, but it's not directed. It's happening in the moment. And it looks like a portrait, but we know it's not set up. We know it's not staged or directed. And so it sort of progresses, this sort of goes into the various ceremonies that happen, and we shoot wide and we get tighter and tighter and tighter into detail. So again, there's a natural flow there. And the way we're designing these albums makes it deliberately difficult for brides and grooms to remove images, just mainly because they're beautiful images and they don't want to remove them. But that's a great thing for us because, we want them to have more pages. We want them to have more spreads and more images. Same thing here. This is the next part of the ceremony, and I'm not going to go and explain the ceremony itself, but again, it's how we tell a story. We start with a mid frame, we've got a tight frame, then we've got a picture with everyone in it, then we've got another detail. The image in the middle is actually the same as the one on the top left. It's just me changing my camera angle to isolate the couple there and remove everyone else. So, within a few moments, we can create different images of the same thing that tell a story, an overall story within that spread. So again, using little vignettes to shoot through, because remember, the album is the thing that they will take away. That's the thing that they're going to cherish, and that's the thing that they're going to show to their kids in the future and their grandkids in the future, and they want to be able to show them what they look like at their absolute best. So we're always looking for beauty. We're always looking for these things that are flattering. So it progresses. I'm going to cycle through some of these very quickly. But all of these things tell a story and have a meaning to the bride and groom. So much meaning that, they're left with a difficult but a good problem of, which images should they remove. Ideally, they're not going to remove any because it's so well designed and the images are so beautiful that they just want to keep the whole thing. More often than not, it works. Sometimes you have to understand that everyone, some brides and grooms have different financial means, but you've got to help them through that basically. So even with the group shots, guys, I'm lighting these like it's in a studio. We'll take our time to organize things carefully to make all the group shots look like they fit within the album visually as well. There's no change in sort of feel between them. And then we get back to the more sort of PJ stuff, the emotion, that kind of thing. And again, look, these shots on the outside, these shots are taken from the inside, but they still have the same feel to them, the same colors, the same impact, and they look like they belong together. So again, it makes it difficult to say, well, like, this image doesn't belong here, I'm going to remove that. You don't want that. You want people to say, I want to keep them all. Then we move on to the portrait. So obviously this is more controlled in terms of the direction, the lighting, and that sort of thing. It kind of tells a story. So it does go on to the reception, but I'm not going to show all of that because there's a lot to go through. But how does all this come together in the upsell? Well, let's think about other brands like, say, Bentley and Rolls-Royce or Louboutin and Virtue, the mobile phones. What makes people confide in these brands? Why do people allow these brands into their lives, and why do they trust these brands enough to treat them as an investment in their own identity and well-being, despite the price? Well, it's because they trust the image of that brand. They trust the quality, they trust the finish, they identify with the status associated with that brand. Maybe there's a sense of accomplishment in owning that product by that particular brand. These cars, these shoes, these phones have such a huge price premium over the more mainstream, and I say that with sort of in inverted commas brands, that they cater for a market that will invest in them without second thought. So why aren't we all aspiring to achieve, the same brand kudos? Why are we not all pushing ourselves, everything we do to build that brand that brides and grooms are going to believe in and say, I want iJogia because I want the iJogia brand, I want the iJogia product, and I want the iJogia albums. An important thing to remember while you're thinking about all this is that luxury brands don't do giveaways, they don't do price matching, they don't undercut ever. And the reason is if they do any of these things, it's going to undermine their value. Just like if you do it, it'll undermine your values, your standards, your image and your integrity, more to the point. And it sets a negative precedent that just becomes a downward spiral. Especially if you have a sort of a repeat client, you shoot a wedding, and then their cousin comes to you and says, "Oh, you shot this person's wedding, and I want to use you guys as well." But you gave them a throwaway deal, so we want the same thing, and you just set yourself a precedent that you can't get out of, and that's what your brand becomes. So don't do that, guys. There are ways of being able to win the jobs and win the client's trust, which will mainly be through your images and through your expertise and through your experience and what they see, that they're just convinced that they want you as a brand. And more often than not, they'll find the money to pay the extra premium to have you and have your products. So while we're talking about products, these are albums by Graphic Studio in this case. So I use all the main brands. It just depends on what the bride and groom like when they come to see us. And this particular couple happened to like this product, and so we designed something that was very bespoke for them as well. And in their collection, and they would have spent rather a lot of money. We're talking about 5 figures on this couple. This is actually the Iceland couple. On the coverage, on us turning up and shooting their wedding. And within that collection, they would have got 1 album, which is of a certain value. And I can't give away the actual figures here because I'm sure you understand, privacy and the confidence of the couple sort of comes into play here. But let's put it this way: an album would be in its thousands, okay, and they paid to have a second one, and then they paid to have parent albums of both albums for both sides. Okay, so essentially, without giving too much away, again, we're nearly knocking on the door of 5 figures on album upsells. And why? Because of what we showed them. Our work, we showed them us as people, our approach, our mentality, our integrity, our brand reputation was known to them. So that was very helpful and very powerful. So they're already invested in that. They already believed in that. And when they saw the albums that we showed them, they said, "I love this, but can you do this? Can you have it wrapped in this material like a car or something like that?" So I said, "Look, I'll tell you what we can do. We'll speak to our manufacturer, see what we can do." So we ended up having these albums made, which is this beautiful soft touch material with sort of gold foiling on the raised foiling on the covers, on the box and on the actual album cover as well. And they said, "Well, look, can we have her side have white albums and my side have the black albums?" So we said, "Yeah, absolutely." There's you never say no. It's always have a can-do attitude, because that will go a long way. If you don't want to create a roadblock, you don't want to create hurdles for the clients. You want to make the experience for them easy. So it is about creating an experience, a brand experience for the couple. Make it easy for them to have stuff. Make it easy for them to sort of share ideas with you. And this is all part of the brand. So think about any luxury experiences that you've had with brands, big brands, what makes them successful. And think about the bad experiences you've had with people and what's made them unsuccessful. And, you're always going to come across difficulties. You're always going to come across problems. But your attitude toward dealing with these things and toward people will shine through, because you'll help them through it. And suddenly the problems go away, and it's not it's not a big thing anymore. So, I hope this has been helpful, and I hope this has helped to kind of explain how building your own identity and your own brand can make it easy for you to sell things afterwards. In this situation and the album design I showed you, what we had done was we'd pre-designed an album for them above and beyond what they got in the actual collection. And we said to them from the start that we will over design your album, and your challenge will be to remove images or remove spreads. And so they were prepared for that from the start. It's not as though they signed up for, say, an A3 album that had 30 pages, but we deliberately designed 60 pages and they didn't know about it. We told them from the start, this is what's going to happen, because we're going to design an album that tells the perfect story. And your options are either you remove the pages and the images, or you pay for the extras. And so they had the option. They had time to prepare for that from the beginning. So more often than not, they come over and they might want to remove some spreads and some images. They might want to swap some out because, you know, they just prefer one image over another. That's fine. Remember, it's always a can-do attitude. And then you talk them through their options in terms of the upgrades. Now, I said earlier on about how sort of the big brands don't do giveaways and how they don't discount or how they don't undercut. Discounting is a gray area, okay? If you discount so much that people question why you charge them that in the first place, that's going to question your integrity. That's going to impact your integrity. So don't do that. You know, you can keep a little bit up your sleeve, just as everybody does with your pricing. There's always a certain amount of movement, and you can discount in a number of ways. It doesn't have to be just price, but you can offer other products of the same value. And having the product of the same value actually has more value overall in the ownership and the experience that they'll have than saving them a few pounds. Because in the long run, they'll realize that those few pounds meant nothing. It's a drop in the ocean. So then it becomes easier to be able to upsell albums. You know, your print labs might be offering you a discount at that point, or they might have a deal going on where you can offer a bigger album for not much more money. You can pass that along, and that gives you the opportunity to design bigger albums and therefore sell more pages. So don't just think of it as the labs are offering this discount. I'm just going to pass it on just to keep my client happy. Yeah, you can keep your client happy by saying, look, I'll give you a bigger album for nothing or for a small price premium, but here's an opportunity to have bigger spreads, you know, a bigger layout, more pages, that sort of thing. So there's lots of ways of being able to sort of upsell afterwards. And you know, we're talking about big figures here, absolutely. And it's, for most people, it's not an easy thing to be able to deal with. So, you know, you might want to say to them, look, okay, I don't need everything up front. We can break this down. You can, you know, pay us in installments 2 or 3 months and break it down and make it easier for them to cope with. Because a lot of the time, in my experience, it's not so much the overall figure that's a problem with brides and grooms. It's the actual cash flow. So help to make the cash flow easier if it suits your business model as well. And by having a can-do attitude, it's always going to be a positive experience, and they'll have nothing but good things to say about you. And even if things don't always go the way that you want them to, you helping them through the problem means that they'll have good things to say about you because you've helped them through the problems. So, you know, there's a lot to take in here, absolutely a lot to take in here. But my approach to upsells isn't about the salesmanship. It's about building a brand. It's about building your name, building an experience, and having consistency all the way through. Because consistency equals trust. That's how I see it. It's like how you go to your favorite restaurants. You go there because they're consistent and you trust it. And the next time you go and they're not consistent, your trust in that restaurant's going to waver. And it's the same with any brand. So be consistent all the time, because that's going to be trust. That's going to build trust in people. You know, in your brides and grooms. So that's the power of print, and you know, it'll help. The power of print will help raise your standards, your skills, your images, your brand, and therefore your business, and ultimately your profit. If we're shooting for the album, we're shooting to tell stories, we're shooting to ultimately be able to create those beautiful albums in that consistent, high quality way. You know, it's going to have a knock-on effect from the start to the finish. And you know, whilst whilst genuinely creating something that's a one-off, unique piece of, a work of art for your brides and grooms, it will be cherished and will have huge emotional and sentimental value on, for the couple and their families. So yeah, it's hopefully for those of you guys who don't print at the moment and only provide digital files, I hope this has helped to give you some sort of insight into and confidence into actually getting onto printing albums and printing wall art and understanding the effect it can have on you and your work and your business, as a whole, basically. So and using the Fundy software for me has been a big part of this, because it's made the whole experience easier. It's if you haven't used it, actually, guys, it's download the trial and give it a go. The website's just there. It's funnydesigner.com, and have a play with it. Me and the Fundy guys kind of set a little challenge, and we're hoping to do this at one of the trade shows at some point, to create a challenge for people to come up and be able to design an album in sort of 15 or 20 minutes. And you can create a start point in that time, and then how long you spend afterwards refining it, refining the design and refining the images. You might want to spend a day on it afterwards, but the really difficult stuff for people who aren't designers can be done for you very easily, just because it's got very clever mathematics behind it that help you to see all the permutations and combinations of images on a page, and it really does take the pain away. It's an incredible piece of software. So that's me. I hope it's been helpful for you guys. If you've got any questions, I'm here to do a bit of a Q&A as well. I know we're over time, but I'm more than happy to take the questions.
Well, we've got a few questions for you, mate, so you ain't going anywhere just yet. But
No
before we get into that, brilliant. Thank you so much. I know we ran over, so sorry, guys, but I think you're all in agreement, and judging by the comments that I'm going to give you now in a second in the panel, there was no issue with that. A load of them stayed with us because the information was fantastic. I loved it, mate. I've done a load of these now, and I loved it. A great insight. Loved the album. One of the nicest albums I've ever seen, mate. I know it's an easy platform. It's easy for us to talk about Fundy, but just the simplicity, along with the storytelling. You are, my friend, a fantastic storyteller. So my hat's off to you. Very, very jealous as well. You get to travel the world. Very, very envious. Have spent 3 nights in Iceland trying to get what you got. Didn't happen. I've just got some green blur. So yeah, very, very envious of anybody who comes back from Iceland. I'm definitely gonna have to get myself back out there.
Yeah, it's an incredible place.
Brilliant. I'm going to just rob the screen back, but we'll get into these questions. There's only a few key ones. I kept a lot of them you answered as we went, to be honest, which was good. But I've got a few that I have been asked to ask you, so I will be asking them. Let me just grab that back, show my screen. Okay, Sanjay, so they're not in any particular order, bud. Let's just make sure my screen's caught up. We're good. Okay, this one came on quite early, and I thought it was quite interesting because obviously you touched early on that. Now, obviously, you have your meeting, your offices, and where the people meet you. But of course, obviously, not everybody's in that sort of luxury when they're starting out. So, best advice from yourself from in the past, when you were likely to be visiting, say, the clients' homes and stuff. What's the best approach for obviously showing off albums? Really, how many albums would you think your advice that you're going to take for the pre-wedding consultation?
I'll start off by answering that by saying you'll sell what you show. Okay.
Yeah.
More you show, I mean, you can show too much and it becomes confusing. If you want to sell a particular kind of product, then you show more of that. Now, up until the end of last year, we were doing all of our consultations at home, and we've only ever been to a client's house twice in 10 years, and that's because of disabilities on their side, and they couldn't come over, so that was understandable. But other than that, everything was done at home. So just on that, make your place as clean and as welcoming as you can. I'm a bit of a geek and I love audiovisual stuff. So one of my consultation rooms at home is actually my lounge. It's a bit of a man cave and has quite an impact when people come into it. It has a real wow factor. I know not everyone can have that, but have the way I did it originally was I had 2 rooms. One where I did all the sort of audiovisual stuff, and another room where I'd show albums and that kind of thing. So in the AV room, they'd come in, they'd feel comfortable, we'd give them drinks, would talk to them for a while about them and their wedding planning and all that sort of stuff. Just get to know them, and let them feel comfortable, because a lot of couples, when they come to see photographers who work from home, I was slightly paranoid, thinking that, okay, hold on, these guys are going to feel like they've come to my house and they're going to feel like they're on the back foot, or they're going to feel slightly uncomfortable. So make them feel really comfortable, make the place feel clean, uncluttered, put away a lot of personal stuff, and anything that might feel oppressive, I don't know, sculptures or whatever, just something that's going to make it a lot easier for them to get used to being in your environment. Bottles of wine and beer help a lot, absolutely, if they drink, of course. But offer it to them, offer them teas, coffees, make it a nice place for them to be. I think we made it a little too nice at times, because sometimes our consults would go on for like 3 or 4 hours. People just didn't want to leave, but that's a great thing. That's a great thing, because that they've already bought into you. They're not itching to get out of there, So if you're going to do it at home, do it like that. The other room, we would have all the albums laid out on the table with other products and things like that. And we would discourage them from kind of flicking through things on their own, because I want to show them. I will show the albums. I will turn the pages, or Roshni will turn the pages at our pace, so we can talk through the album, the design, the story, everything that goes into it, all the retouching that goes into the album, all the finishing and color correction that goes into it to keep that consistency. There's a lot of hard work that goes into designing the album after the actual initial layout's done. It's a big process, because remember that final album is going to be the thing they take away for the rest of their lives. It needs to be perfect. Sometimes there are problems, sometimes there are manufacturing problems, or there are errors on our part, or the couple may have missed something, but that's part of the process, and you live and learn and you grow from that. But yeah, invite them to your place. Don't try and avoid going to their place, because it puts you on the back foot, and it also limits how much and what you can take with you and show them, because you don't know what the place is going to be like. You don't want to be faffing around boxing and unboxing things. You want things laid out nicely, just like I had on that coffee table where I was, that was where I presented the couple to their albums. I had a couple of glasses, one for water and one for champagne, because when they came in, I opened a bottle of champagne for them, and it was a celebration. Basically, they were getting their albums, and I made an experience out of the whole thing. So when they come over to see you, make an experience. Don't feel awkward about them coming to your home. And I know some of you may have children and that sort of thing. So there are a lot of flexible workplaces where you can hire meeting rooms if you want someone that looks professional, but you don't want your kids screaming in the background or the smell of cooking or whatever. There are various ways around this sort of thing. Okay, and it's taken us this long to build up to where we are, where we could basically have our own, purpose-made showroom to do this sort of thing. So again, think of that as a goal to sort of aspire to and build, so that you can have your own, and that's going to come through how successful your business is, and that's going to come through how successful your sales and therefore your images are. So you kind of have to work backwards and start from the roots up to be able to, let the tree sort of flourish, if you like. So I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, no, absolutely brilliant. Great insight, mate. Fantastic advice there. Techie one about the Northern Lights. Did you use rear curtain flash on the subject when capturing the scene?
No, because that meant that the flash would fire on the second curtain. Yeah. And then the couple would have to stand there through the whole exposure. So you actually want a first curtain flash, which is what the default is there. So the idea is that if it's, I think it might have been a 10-second exposure on that one, I can't remember off the top of my head. You don't want the couple to stand there in what was -25, by the way, guys. It would have been shivering. You don't want them to stand there for 10 seconds trying to hold the pose, because they won't be able to. It'll just blur the image. So first curtain, flash is what lit them, because where we were shooting, there was actually no ambient light in the very little ambient light in the foreground by the time I've exposed for what's going on in the sky. So flash burst, As soon as the burst is gone, the couple walk off the scene, and for the remaining 8 or 9 seconds, it's just exposing for what's going on in the sky and the landscape, and we end up with what we had.
Brilliant, mate. Brilliant. Same. Well, I think it was another question from when you were out there. I think this was when you were talking about the plane shot, but it was more a question about, you mentioned that you fired the cameras with your iPad. Is that right?
That's right. So I was using something called a Cam Ranger.
Right.
Which
that was going to be my next question. So what did you
use? Yeah. So Cam Ranger is a great little device. It can be used on pretty much any brand of camera. You just have to get the right cable that goes from the Cam Ranger into the camera. I'm pretty sure it's just a USB actually. And it creates its own little Wi-Fi network. And so you can, download the Cam Ranger app onto your iPad or your phone, whether it's an iPhone or Android. I'm actually mainly an Android user, but just happens to have an iPad and the screen's big enough to be able to see what's going on. So you can control all the settings from the Cam Ranger. So you can change all the camera settings from there, which is great. Apart from, like, if you've got a camera which has a physical knob to turn from mode to mode, whereas my 1DXs are not, they're electronic. So you can do certain extra things with different cameras, basically. So you can do a live view and see what's going on your iPad, and then just hit the button and it will take the picture, which is fantastic. And then what it'll do is obviously record the picture to your memory card in the camera, but it'll also transfer a JPEG to your iPad, so you can kind of flick through them and sort of review your images on a larger screen and look for flaws, and if you want to make refinements, and you can do that because you're able to see a large version of the picture there. It's quite handy.
Brilliant.
Not very expensive either. I can't remember how much it is, but yeah, you'll see it on Google.
I was going to say we've got some. I was familiar with the Cam Ranger, but we don't have it. We've got the Canon remote apps. There are similar. There is obviously different things out there, but the question actually said, was it Cam Ranger? So you answered that. So perfect, mate. Brilliant.